We're really excited to have China McCarney from Jaeger Sports on with us this morning. So China currently serves as the vice president of Jaeger Sports and is the founder of Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression Foundation. Really appreciate you being on with us today, China. Excited to dive into some really awesome topics.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Excited about the opportunity as well.
So I think first, we kind of want to have you talk about your background, talk about your playing time and your involvement with Jaeger from the playing side and kind of how that evolved into your role now. Just give a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to my first Jaeger Sports camp when I was 12 years old, which was a little time ago now, 21 years ago, and just fell in love with the program. The J bands back then were just black. They had a different clip. It's kind of funny. I still have the band. It's like a relic now. But yeah, just fell in love with the physical side. And then as I got older, realized how important their mental training was, their yoga training and everything like that. And at about 16, 17, I actually started doing the long toss demos when we'd travel around doing the clinics and stuff like that, and did that all the way through really until just a few years ago. And then came on the business side in about 2012 after my playing career got done. I was drafted a couple times and finished up in independent ball in Washington, Pennsylvania, small little town. And after that came on board full time with the business side and have been involved with the development for the last 8 years. So yeah, I always say my little one tagline is I went to a camp when I was 12 and never left. Here I am 21 years later.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And that's one of the things, that I think it's the infamous Jaeger Sports video of you and Trevor Bauer long tossing on the football field that everyone kind of knows and is synonymous with long toss and kind of the development of long toss. So I think Allen is kind of like the godfather of long toss. Like that's how people look at it in the baseball world. So that's kind of, I remember the first video myself seeing, like when I was starting to get involved in like the modern side, I guess you can call it, of player development. And it's like, hey, there are these two guys throwing the ball 400 feet on a long toss on a football field and getting their long toss in. So I think that kind of brings us into the first topic that I really wanted to talk about. That's kind of the arm care and long toss side of it, because I think when we're looking, I know me myself as a pitching coach, when we're looking at arm care and long toss and throwing, I consider throwing a part of arm care. And I think it's really important to have a structured program that's individualized to each guy to maximize what they get out of their throwing every day, and also a controlled arm care program. And I read a quote that Eric Cressy, I think, he put out a couple of years ago on Twitter, where he said, "We don't want to throw to warm up. We want to warm up to throw." And I think that really stuck with me as a coach is, hey, we need to make sure that our guys are doing everything right. It's not just their arm care, band work, dynamic warm up, whatever it is before they throw. We need to make sure that their throwing is structured the way they need to too. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how you guys look at arm care and kind of how that's evolved over the years, and talk a little bit about long toss too, and how you should be tailoring it to specific guys.
No, it's, first of all, just hearing your passion and the way you describe that is your athletes are incredibly lucky to have you. And just, I think the biggest thing is the mental approach to arm care is the first thing when I speak to players, coaches, parents. It's, do you have a specific mindset going into your arm care and your arm training? Because a lot of times, like you said, and I'll see it at parks by my house, is guys will come out, they'll grab a ball and they'll start throwing. And when you switch that mentally, and one of my favorite analogies is you would never sprint. Like if somebody said you have 10 minutes and then we're going to do a timed 60-yard dash, you would do everything in your power to get your legs warmed up for that 60-yard dash. And it should be the same approach to the arm care and the arm with throwing. What are you doing pre-throwing to put yourself in the greatest position to throw? And that's kind of our program is arm circles, bands, and long toss. And so 66% of our program is pre-throwing. It's arm circles and bands, and that's all about blood flow, range of motion, heat, and prepping the throwing specific muscle group so that when you do go do the act of throwing, your arm is much more prepared and it's ready to train. And that's another mental adjustment you have to make, is what type of throwing are you doing on a given day based on in-season, off-season, all that stuff. And we can get into all the nuances and all that stuff. But yeah, I think to answer your question, the biggest difference, which is easy for everyone to make because it's a mental one. What's your mental approach to throwing, to arm care, to arm conditioning? And the second part of your question with coaches and how to tailor the training to each individual athlete, I think is crucial. That's Alan's, our slogan is listen to your arm. And so if you have a cookie cutter program based on distance, time, certain amount of throws, you can get into some very dangerous area based on each individual athlete's needs for sure.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that's one of the things that we see a lot with, the way youth baseball is nowadays and travel ball, and you kind of go up to, and I know this will be my first summer coaching on the travel ball circuit, hopefully. That's my hope as we're out there. You run into these time constraints where you have guys, you have games, and it's like, hey, we got to get a guy ready in 30 minutes. And it's like, well, okay, how do we maximize that guy getting ready? Or is this really healthy for him? And it's like, that's where I think as a baseball world as a whole, we need to really reevaluate youth baseball and how we're approaching it, because I think long-term, it doesn't really help guys when you're not giving them that time. Especially like pre-start, you have a guy and he's got 20 minutes to get ready, and it's like, hey, go throw 90 feet, and then you got to be in the pen because you got 15 minutes. So I think that's really important. I think if we can control it as coaches from the practice standpoint, and then even if we're in-game coaches too, really controlling it from the game standpoint, I think we're serving these younger players good by giving them that opportunity to really understand themselves and how they move and what makes them work. I think the biggest thing that I found myself as a coach is the question I ask the most is, how did that feel? Or what did you feel? Because we only know so much. We can't get inside their minds as coaches and say, hey, like, what are you thinking or what do you feel, without asking them that question. So like you said, I think the individualization is really, really important in terms of maximizing what we're getting out of guys. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the individualizing of long toss, because I think we hear a lot nowadays, some guys like long toss, some guys are like, hey, I don't really like long toss. And I think there's a good happy medium in between to kind of balance those guys out. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about individualizing a long toss program or progression and blending it all together with mound work and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think like we just did a resource, what is long toss and how often should you do bands, how often should you do long toss and stuff like that. And I think the biggest question you have to answer first for anybody, whichever athlete is, are you in season or are you off season? For the sake of the question, I'll answer is if we're in the off season and we have time to train. Because the way we like to work it is, let's say you have to be ready by September 1st, work backwards 2 months, and that's how the progression should work. If you have 8 weeks, you're golden. Even 4 to 6 weeks, you can accomplish a lot of the same things. But again, I'll go back to listening to the arm and each individual athlete. If they like to long toss, that's great for us. We're basing everything off of our experience over the last 3 decades. And we love arc throwing, because that's another one of the hot topics in the baseball world is throwing with arc, not throwing with arc. Mm-hmm. We've seen, based on years, you've seen the video, you referenced it with Trevor Bauer. I love the way that opens up the arm. And Alan talks about it in great detail in our year-round throwing manual and stuff like that, where if you're working away at those extreme distances with arc, you're opening your arm up to many different angles that you wouldn't get if you're just throwing on a line. And so it's progressively opening up the shoulder, and just basically it's like stretching. You want to open up, you want to get flexibility, range of motion in there. And so that's the cheap version, the 2-bit version of why we throw with arc. Mm-hmm. But if you watch a guy like Clayton Kershaw, if you go pregame to him, his long toss is much more on a line than what we would necessarily teach, but it works for him. Mm-hmm. So that goes back to, he's obviously figured out what works for him. Yep. And so it really comes down to, as a coach, and this, when we get more into the mental side and the mental side of the coaching, I guess this would be more relevant there. But as a coach, I think one of the hardest parts, and you can attest to this, I can definitely attest to it, is you can only do so much, right? Yep. So you can give the athlete the freedom to be experimental and figure out what works for their arm care program, but they have to do the work. They have to be disciplined. Like a guy like Clayton Kershaw's done the work. He figured out that he likes to throw a little bit more on a line. And then other guys will figure out they like to throw. But if they're not willing to do the work, it's going to come back on them anyway. But yeah, so it's just giving the athlete the freedom. And then if you have the 2 weeks or the 2 months to kind of progressively work that up, you're going to have time to figure it out. It's a lot harder. We'll have people contact us in the middle of the season and say, we want to implement your throwing program. Mm-hmm. And that's where it can be a little dangerous, because you're at practice, you have time constraints, you have all these things that are dictating your throwing, and you don't get a chance to kind of lay the foundation, which is the first section of our throwing manual, is build the base up, which is the most important part.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's awesome because you can see guys really find themselves when they have control over their throwing. And that was something like you said with the Kershaw example. Like when we had Nick Birdie come in this offseason, we talked a little bit about, hey, what do you normally do? And he was like, I used to long toss 300 feet in college, but once I got to the big leagues and realized I needed to pitch every other day, it's something where I couldn't long toss. Mm-hmm. And his long toss was 200 feet or 180 to 200 feet, but he would get his throwing with an arc in to stretch himself out, and then he'd bring it back in. So he kind of found that happy medium of like, hey, this is what feels like long toss to me, but it doesn't burn me out. And I think that's really crucial, like we just talked about.
Yeah, just real quick, I don't want to interrupt you at all, but I think for the audience, how crucial of a point you just made, it's just unbelievable, because when people think of long toss, they have this visual of 300 feet, 350 feet. That's not true. That's not the case. Everybody's long toss is different on a given day and based on what they need. And long toss can be 180 feet. If that's what your arm needs and you're doing it that way, that's completely fine. And so that's a good thing to take away right there for the audience, is long toss is individualized, and there shouldn't be this, well, if I don't throw 300 feet, I'm not long tossing. That's not the case at all. It's what your arm needs on a given day. If you're giving it freedom and you're allowing it to kind of stretch out, you're doing long toss, even if it's 120 feet. And so that was a great point. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but wanted to make sure to take that away. It's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's definitely. That kind of brings that we can talk a little bit about before we get into the mental side. Being in New England, I think that one of the things that's hardest for our guys is when we're in that off season, we're backdating from usually high school baseball. If we're talking about a high school guy, high school baseball usually starts here in mid-March, weather permitting, if it's not snow on the ground. So a lot of what we do, I know my whole this off season, we were indoors. I think there was maybe a couple of times where guys were able to get outside and long toss. So I know this is something that you guys push out a lot about, how to maximize your long toss indoors. So I'd like for you to go a little in depth into indoor long toss and maximizing that, and the importance of feel and understanding feel when you're long tossing into a net per se.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's another reason I fell in love with Jaeger Sports and program, is it just seemed like Alan Jaeger, the founder, would just address so many different topics you don't think about. I'm from Southern California. I can get outside to throw. And when I saw the inclement weather throwing article, it was like, oh man, like I'm blessed, I'm lucky. And so, so if you go to our Twitter page every time in the winter, at least 20 times throughout the months, Alan will post videos and stuff on how to get inclement weather throwing in. And basically, if you are fortunate enough where you can throw indoors, if you can find a net, a fence, a pad like in a gym or something, and you can throw indoors, you can basically simulate your entire throwing program based on throwing with arc into the net or into the pad, and then pulling down if you're in pull down shape or whatnot. But it's all the same stuff you would do outside. So you'd warm up your body, you would do arm circles, you would do a full set of J-bands, and then you would start your throwing progression just like you would outdoors. The only difference, you don't have a partner, you're throwing nice and easy into a net, and then you work your way up. And that's another part of the mental discipline where hopefully you've built up feel, like you were talking about, and you know about how far you throw, and you can kind of simulate that into a net. Another way to get similar benefits, and we had somebody, I don't remember what year it was, but someone didn't have access to throwing outside at all for a couple months. And so what they would do is they would do the 10 J-band exercises, and then number 11 is the forward throws with the J-bands. And so they would do that normal, then they'd take a break, and then they would inch out maybe 1 or 2 inches and do another set of 25 forward throws with the bands. So it's like resistance. Take a break, inch out, so on and so forth, 4 or 5 sets. And when they came back to throw, they were amazed at how much their arm had kind of improved over that time. just by doing resistance band work in the throwing motion and doing that 3, 4, 5 times a week, 4 or 5 sets. So there is always a way. I know Trevor Bauer's famous story is he didn't have anybody in high school that wanted to long toss with him.
Yeah.
And so he had a bicycle and a bucket of balls at lunch, and he would ride to the park and he would long toss by himself with a bucket. And so that comes back to the mental part where it just becomes how important is your arm care to you, your arm development. And Alan has another line, your arm is your lifeline in your career. Like you can hit, you can rake, you can run, but if you can't throw, there's only so many DHs, and there's only, so many spots. And so if you take it serious, you're always going to figure out a way to get it in. And I know for me, when I think about long toss and I think about the demos I did, I've always explained to people, long toss was meditation to me.
Yeah. It
was like, pitching there's so much data that's going through your head, signs, bunt defense, what inning is it? What friggin' sign rigmarole are we on this inning? To where I know what pitch I'm supposed to throw. But long toss is what I controlled, and it just turned into a meditation to me where it's almost like running. You just kind of go out there, you're with your thoughts, you focus on the throwing, and it just turns into this beautiful thing. And so if you prioritize it and you want to get it done, you can for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the point that you made that I really took out of that was the mental discipline aspect of it. And I think that's one of the things that, this being my first year of really going through an off season with a lot of really good high school pitchers and college pitchers, middle school, whatever it is, across a wide variety of age groups, is when you're indoors and your only friend is a net that day, you got to have a lot of mental discipline, because you get a lot of guys that are like, oh yeah, like this felt good. And they kind of go out and I'll be watching and it's like, well, are you really maximizing what you're getting out of it? And it's kind of giving them that understanding that, hey, you have to have the mental discipline to do this, because it's easy when you're on a football field and you can see 300 feet, you're standing in one end zone and you see your friend at the other end zone. It's easy to kind of have that, okay, I'm going to throw this ball 300 feet if that's your plan for the day. But when that's your plan for the day and you're stuck indoors, you got to be able to channel that feel and say, okay, I'm going to actually execute on this. So I think that's really important. And I'm really glad you brought up that point. So I think now I think it's a good time to transition into talking a little bit about the mental game. And I know you guys are big into meditation, and I think that's something, being in the private sector, it's tough to implement that meditation process and kind of talk a little bit more about the mental side in depth. And that's something I was looking forward to, being in the team aspect this summer, when you're with guys a little bit more every day. So I want you to kind of talk a little bit about, if, as a coach, if you were to program mental exercises into your team's daily work, how would you do so? Because I think we're going to have a lot of coaches listening into this. I think this is really important.
No, absolutely. I think first and foremost, we have a free article on our media page called the 10-Minute Practice Plan. And it basically answers that question about, if you're a coach and you have 10 minutes of your practice plan, how would you implement a simple mental practice? And it is tough. We've like the word meditation sometimes has different like religious connotations. People take it, and we've had questions about that. But all it really is deep breathing exercises, because if you can get really good and get a really intimate relationship with your breath, you can basically bring yourself back to the present moment when thoughts start to spiral, the bases are loaded, there's a scout in the stands, there's all these things, these variables you're thinking about. Do you have a default system to go back to bring you back to ground zero so you can focus and trust your instincts? And so for coaches, what we would love to see, and what we've seen on social media, guys will take pictures, is if you just have 10 minutes at the beginning of practice, at the end of practice, whatever it is, lay your team down and just have them do breathing exercises. The simplest one, like basic 101, is have them get still for a couple minutes. They'll be itchy on the grass or whatever, but have them get as still as they can for 2 minutes. And then for 4 or 5 minutes, just have them count their breath. So on the inhale, it's 1, exhale 2, inhale 3, exhale 4, so on and so forth. And at about 8 or 9, they're going to lose count, especially at the beginning, because it's just, your brain's like, wait a minute, you're giving me a chance to attack you right now? You have a test in math next week. That girl will text you, you got this. And so your brain will kind of bring up all this stuff. But the more they do it, the more they'll get good at just focusing on the breath. And the way that tangibly transfers to performance is the variables we were talking about, right? Because when you're doing the breathing exercises and you're counting, and all these thoughts start coming in your head, I got to pay bills, I got to take the trash out, all this stuff. Mine just came into my head. You hear that? But if you can get back to the breath and train yourself to do that, your body will start getting used to that. Your mind will start getting used to that. So now all of a sudden when you're at the plate and you start thinking about second and third with 2 outs, I got to get a hit, all this stuff, those are negative. Those are detrimental to your performance. So you can bring yourself back to your process, which is another thing we can talk about if you'd like. But you bring yourself back, your brain will be trained to be like, wait a minute, that stuff's all irrelevant right now. I'm going to take a deep breath and focus on the next pitch and let my instincts, let my talent take over. And so I think a lot of times, at least for me, the thing I always want to get across is you can talk about mental training and you can talk about the exercises. And you can talk about if you're more clear and you're, more relaxed, you'll perform better. But how do the two coincide? That's the biggest myth I see today in like mental training is, you take more ground balls, you're going to be a better defender. You take more BP or you do this with your form, you're going to be a better hitter. Well, when you tell me to mental practice, why? And how is it going to translate to my performance? And as a coach, why am I going to do this with my players? Can you show me, or can you tell me an example of where they're going to be better? And so I always like to give that. It's a very basic example. We do in-depth visualization, all kinds of different exercises, batter's box management with closed eyes and different things. But that basic one, I think can help so many different people in so many walks of life, is when that stuff starts going. And I pulled 2 things from my life unintentionally. I have to take the trash out and I have to pay bills.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they're always there. So yeah, I think that's kind of the basics there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Those are great points. And I think one of the things, and you touched on process, and I think that kind of leads into the next thing is when we're looking at process, I think we can do the 10 minutes, but I think the biggest thing is to carry over from the 10 minutes into that day of practice or into everything that you do, whether it's like you said, it's your everyday life or what you're doing on the baseball field. And I know that's something that I try to preach is I think 2 things that kind of have never changed over the course of baseball is breathing and your eyes. I think your eyes and your breath can do a lot for you, especially as pitchers, because, if I told a guy to look at center field and try and throw the ball to home plate, well, he's probably not going to be able to do that. So I think the biggest thing is, and this is kind of what I've preached in every time you throw the baseball, whether it's you're standing 10 feet away from the guy when you're first starting to play catch, or you're 300 feet away, or you're on the mound, or you're in a bullpen, whatever the setting is having that process, understanding what your process is, finding that comfortable breath. Like, is it a deep breath? Is it a shorter breath? And I'd like you to touch a little bit upon that is process and kind of helping guys define what their process is.
Yeah, no, it's just beautiful what you said. And the only guy I could think of that could look at center field and throw it to home plate was Hideo Nomo. But yeah, no, the process is huge. And basically what's your intent with everything that you're doing? I see that a lot with, well, not anymore, but when we used to go out and do clinics and we would show this methodical throwing program where, like I said, it would be a meditation for me and everything like that. And then we'd give the kids a chance to throw right afterwards. And it would blow my mind sometimes how there was no intent.
Yeah.
And it was just, grabbing the ball, throwing head everywhere and everything like that. And so intent is crucial. And that's basically what the process is, pitch to pitch. And so that's basically square one with our mental training. After we get a relationship with the breath is defining your process. And everyone's process is going to be a little different. But for us, we have 2 very simple ones that we teach for pitchers and for hitters. And then you can take it, make it your own recipe and get the ingredients in there that put you in the best position for success. But basic one, and it goes back to what you said, John, because breath and the eyes. So for a pitcher, my process was deep breath first and foremost, because that gets me back to the present moment. That's number 1, deep breath. Number 2 is focal point, right? So that's the eyes. So focal point, smaller the better, worked for me, and we've noticed that's worked for more athletes, is if you can get a smaller focal point on the glove, a lace on the glove, something like that, and then attack. That was it. 1, 2, 3. Deep breath, focal point, attack. That worked for me. I've heard other pitchers where deep breath, focal point, balance, attack, because they had a problem rushing to the plate or different things. And that's where, again, mental discipline, go on the journey, have fun discovering what works for you. For a hitter, Jim Batcher, the co-owner of Jaeger Sports, played in the big leagues. He's about 5'8", so you know he did something right. And his as a hitter, he would deep breath, get grounded. He wanted a very solid base in the batter's box. Focal point was see the ball well. So it's same with the eyes. Instead of focal point, it's see the ball well and then attack. And attack doesn't mean swinging at every pitch, but intent on every pitch, seeing it well and attacking that. And so those are our basic two. And like you said, starts with the breath, goes to the eyes, and then what's your intent? So deep breath, focal point, attack, deep breath, see the ball well, attack. If you can kind of start there with a very basic process, and then if you start noticing that you're making the same mistake consistently, add a solution to your process, right? Like that one example I used, if you're rushing towards home plate, check in with your balance as part of your process. And then all of a sudden it'll become your default, like anything else, muscle memory. And then you can move on. The simpler, the better, 3 or 4 bullet points, because it becomes the opposite of a process if all of a sudden it's 12 bullet points. But that's the basic nutshell of the process for us.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I think it's really, really important because in the way baseball is today, and I know I'm big into using Rapsodo and looking at pitch design and pitch development and sequencing and tunneling and how can we better a guy's arsenal. I think the biggest thing that I found is the simpler you can make it for the guy, the better. And one of the things that I really like that you said was focal points. And that's something I talk about all the time is, how can we have one focal point for 3 different pitches? And I think the simpler you can make it for guys, the better, because now you go, like you said, breath, focal point, attack, and it doesn't matter what pitch they're throwing. They have that same process instead of saying like, hey, when you throw your slider, you need to look at the right knee of the catcher, and your fastball, you need to look up here. And sometimes, yeah, we need to do that to help guys kind of hone in. But the simpler we can make it, I think I found that to be better for guys because they can now revert back to that process and just execute an attack.
Well, and one point I'll add on that is when you start to, like anything else, when you practice it and you get better and you start to evolve with it. Like for me, with my process in high school, it was deep breath, focal point, attack. Junior college, basically the same. And then I started messing around with different focal points. But after about year 5, 6, 7, I was so comfortable in the process, like mindset, that I had a different focal point. The process was the exact same. It was deep breath, focal point, attack. But for my curveball, if I wanted it to be here, I knew I had this focal point for my slider. But like you said, is do not start there. That took years of getting comfortable with process mindset, not worrying about this, not worrying about this, and just focusing on those 3 steps. But like anything else, the more you get comfortable with it, you can start adding, taking away, and it keeps evolving. It's not where it's a kind of a concrete thing from day one and then it has to stay that way. That's kind of the fun part about life, I feel like, is you can keep changing, keep learning, and keep using things and keeping things that help you.
Yeah, I think, and this kind of goes into what I wanted to discuss next is simplicity, because when I think the majority of people that I know most people deal with in the baseball world is this high school, middle school population, the youth population. And sometimes we forget that they have a lot of other stuff going on in their life, whether it's school, it's a girlfriend, it's whatever's going on at their house. With technology, I mean, everyone's on their phone 24/7. So they're getting however many text messages a day. You have guys who, are at a really high level and you have articles written about, and there's a lot of pressure. And I think I wanted to talk a little bit about how to handle that and how to relate to that as coaches. Because I think that's really important, is understanding where you guys are at. And when they come in every day saying, okay, how was your day today? I think it's like getting to know your athletes on that individual level, I think is really, really powerful. And I wanted you to dive into that a little bit and how to really understand that when you're creating a process for a guy, and how maybe you can alter that process day to day based on how a guy's feeling or maybe what's going on in his everyday life.
Yeah, this is my hot button, and we didn't even talk about this before. we hopped on or anything in the past, but this will get me going because I think coaches miss this all the time.
Yeah.
And if you analyze why you're in coaching, first and foremost, hopefully it's for the kids, right? And it's for the athletes, and it's you want to improve them. And if you look at yourself and that's not the reason why, well, then get out of coaching because you're being a detriment to everybody else. But if that's the reason why you're in there, then it should be one of your first priorities, your first job to invest in the kids, get to know them as a human being, kind of see, like Pete Carroll talks about this all the time. And he has his psychologist where they'll do like a questionnaire at the beginning of whatever their season so he can get to know his players and see how do they react. Do they react to a little more stern, loud voice, more of a conversation? And so as a coach, I think we've been talking about mental discipline for the players. Well, you have to have mental discipline as a coach. You have to get to know yourself first and foremost. Why am I in coaching? And really, please, for the sake of everyone, answer that question honestly. And if you're in it for your ego or for yourself, pick a different job.
Yeah.
And and then if once you are in it for the kids, start thinking about what do I do to get to know the kids? Like, how does this kid react when I do this? And try to really, it's like a performance in athletics, right? We watch the film or we watch the tape, or now we have all these analytics and spin rate and stat, and we analyze it, right? So that we can make an improvement to do better the next time. Well, as a coach, you should be doing the same thing with how you're talking to your athletes, coaching your athletes, implementing plans. It's, I did this to Jimmy, and Jimmy didn't react. I'm going to try something else with Jimmy. Not Jimmy needs to fall in line with me, right?
Yep.
I don't even know why I use Jimmy. I don't know Jimmy. But but you have to be making adjustments too. And so, and then like you said, I think more than ever now, kids are being thrown more than they ever have mentally. I think, technology is amazing, but social media, the expectations, in my foundation, I deal with, parents that contact me because of suicides, because of social media expectations their children aren't living up to. And so we have to be a little more understanding. I know there's the old school, you got to be tough and you got to do this, but the bottom line is you want the best performance out of your athletes. And to get that, you need to know them as human beings. And we can tie this back into the physical program, like with us, and why I was drawn to it is there's parameters of the Jaeger Sports throwing program, but in reality, it's my throwing program, right? And once I start doing it, I get to go as far as I want. I get to feel out my arm, and it's got to be the same. I told you this was a hot button. I'm going to go a long tangent here, but
that's fine.
Yeah, it just gets to me because I had great coaches. I had some not so good ones that, some were about, it felt like their ego and disciplinarian for their sake instead of discipline for growth,
yes.
And there's a big difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm glad you went off on that because I think that's really important. I think a lot of coaches lose sight of that. And I think it's really apparent in the youth game. Because you can do a lot of damage to a kid at 10, 11, 12 years old if you're not handling him the right way. And if we're looking at keeping kids in this game for a long time, I think it's really important that those coaches at that age are leaving a positive impact on those kids because it formulates how they are, even if they still elect to play baseball up until middle school, high school, and beyond. It formulates how they approach the game and kind of what their reaction is as a guy. You might have a kid who becomes really defensive and, he maybe goes into a shell because he had his first experience with a coach was yelling and screaming and it's my way or the highway. And I think we want to give guys the best environment to succeed. And when we're looking at like how they can go out and dominate every time they go out, we want to set that as that's our goal for them and them to understand that. And I think you see a lot I think baseball's done a really good job of it now and kind of how the game's evolved is where we see awesome people like what you guys are doing and, what we see around the country with player development and how it's grown. I think we're starting to turn that corner in relating to guys more and individualizing things and understanding where they come from. But I think if it can really reach that youth game and little league and travel ball and those younger guys, I think we can make a bigger impact on where the game kind of goes.
Yeah. And one last thing I'll add to that too is for especially parents and coaches of that younger age is analyze yourself and how you approach mistakes or failure with your athlete. And is it aggressive? Because like you said, a lot of times, especially at those younger age, they're formulating ideas of life in general and who
Yep.
they are as an individual. And so if you're chastising on a mistake, or I saw something at a Little League game I went to, it's 5 years ago, and it just scarred me for life. And it was 9-year-old who the bases were loaded. He got a ground ball at second base, and he threw it away, and they lost the game. And his dad wouldn't look at him. First yelled at him on the field, and then wouldn't look at him. And when they were at the car, I was walking by them, and I know them a little bit. And he's just like, ugh. And he looked at his son and gave me that look like, I'm sorry for my son. And I just was looking at this kid, and it's like those little moments, because you can look back to your own career and remember like, oh, I remember when this coach did that or this. So as a parent or a coach, especially of younger kids that are developing and getting an identity, is are you talking through the mistake of how they can improve the next time? Because that's what mistakes are in life in general. Learn from them,
Mhm.
right? Don't just, especially if they're mental mistakes, it's like, hey, what were you thinking there? Okay, well, here's what we should do. And you kind of evolved. And if you want to do it in a stern tone, to each their own, I guess. But the pointless disciplinarian demeaning and putting down is going to do nothing for anyone. And like you said, that can develop terrible tendencies, terrible habits to where you'll lose a kid early on. And so I think that's a huge point for parents and coaches is kind of analyze yourself of how you're dealing with failure. Are you talking about how failure is just a part of this game, especially? And you got to learn from it, build upon it. And it's a good thing. Failure, hey, we're going to be okay. I know
Yep.
that's not what you wanted, but we're going to do this next time. We're going to try, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of camaraderie building
Mhm.
and confidence building to the athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. I think it's finding that happy medium because we get like there's two ends of the spectrum. There's like we talked about there's that kind of like, hey, we're putting them down all the time. And then you have that one where it's like you have these coaches in these environments where kids are put on these pedestals and it's like and then you see that work ethic lack when they get to their crucial developmental stages where it really matters because like I've been told their whole life, hey, I'm really good, this and that. And I think it's important to find that happy medium to continue to encourage development and growth while also putting them on somewhat of a pedestal to know that they're good enough to go out and succeed. So I think that was awesome. I think we hit upon a lot of really good points there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss, like you talked about a little bit about your foundation, how that started, what kind of the goal of that is, because I think this is a really important topic that kind of goes unnoticed, especially in sports and kind of the society we live in nowadays.
Yeah, yeah. So the Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression Foundation, I started in the winter of 2016. I did a social media movement in November. It was a 100-mile November challenge where you ran, shared a story about mental health or whatnot, and raised money for mental health. And then we donated it to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. But that 1 month, the response was so incredible because for the first time in my life, I've dealt with panic attacks and an anxiety disorder since 2009, which was my junior year of college, which is the year for baseball, right? And getting drafted and this and that. And so I hid everything I was going through because I didn't want the scouts to think I was mentally weak or whatnot. And so I hid it for years. I reached out for therapy finally 6 years later in 2015. And I shared my whole story publicly in that winter of 2016. And the response was so incredible. I knew I had to do something bigger. And so I started the foundation. And basically, everything we do just creates resources for anyone, not just athletes suffering from a mental health disorder, anxiety, depression, and there's so much of it in sports with performance anxiety. When you retire, retirement anxiety of where's my identity now? I'm a player.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest resource we provide is free therapy. So that's where 95% of the funds basically go. Is any of the funds we raise, we pay for therapy for individuals in need. And it's been incredible. We did the first ever mental health awareness night in the WNBA with the Los Angeles Sparks, which was really fun. We did a mental health awareness day last year with the Arizona Diamondbacks. and Trevor Bauer of all days. I had no clue. Trevor Bauer was the starting pitcher for the Reds against the Diamondbacks that day. It was bizarre. So yeah, it's been cool, and it's been cool to see the transition, kind of like Jaeger Sports with the long toss movement. 15 years ago, there was, half people were on board, half people not, and this and that, and that's grown, and a lot more people are open to individualized progressive programs. Same thing with mental health, which is really cool. Is I was so afraid to share 11 years ago because no one shared, and now you've got Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, John Hamm, like celebrities, and more people being willing to be open and talk about it, because the statistics say 7 out of 10 of us are going to deal with something at some point. And so I just wanted to create a community, like a real world community around mental health was kind of my goal, and tell my story and just put a face on it and just let people know that if you're struggling, don't struggle in silence, because I know how bad that sucks. And there are people and resources out there that can help. And so, yeah, that's that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, because this kind of all ties back into everything we talked about, and it's like athletes need to be comfortable expressing themselves, and anyone for that matter. It's important to talk to the people around you that are in your corner, and that's one of the things I try and say is like I'm an open book. Like you can text me at any time and talk about whatever you want to talk about, whether it's you're reading an article about loading into the back hip or long toss, whatever it is. Or even if it's like, hey, I had this problem in school, like I have guys text me about grades and this and that. And it's like, that's what I want as a coach, because I know that it's helping, they're comfortable and they feel like they're in a really good environment. And I think that's important as coaches, is that we are open books and we're receptive to someone coming to us and talking about that kind of stuff. Because like you said, you held it in for a while. So you never know, like if someone could have helped you along the way. And I think that's important now, is pushing this now and doing what you're doing is really, really important, because we want to give kids that ability to come and talk to someone, because, we could save someone's career, save someone's life for that matter. And I think being open and receptive to that as coaches that's part of our job. Because I think we're around kids more than their teachers or their school guidance counselor or whatever it is. And they might feel more comfortable talking to us. And if we are kind of open to that, I think we can make a really, really positive impact on someone.
Well, and I hope coaches, anybody tuning in, just heard what you said, John, because that's so crucial. And it gives me goosebumps, because the detrimental effects of the opposite approach, I've dealt with them at the foundation. I've had terrible calls. I've had to deal with some just really sad stories of coaches. Like I had no idea, and like their player lost their life or whatnot. And so be honest. When I had a coach that my door is always open, but you felt like if you walk through that door, he's going to punch you in the face. So it's like, that's a weird feeling. And so if you mean it and you're genuine, and it comes back to the caring of the kids and why you're doing it. It's just so cool to hear you say that. And kids text you about grades and different things like that. And so that's so cool. And I hope people listening take that to heart and realize kind of why we're all in this thing. We're all a family. And especially in times like now, we realize how much sports are our family and how much we miss it, being confined to our homes for this extended period of time.
Yeah. I think, I appreciate you talking about that, because when we went back and forth in an email, I was like, that's something we need to talk about, because I think there's a lot of people talking about long toss and arm care and how to stay in shape during this time and in this downtime. But I think that's something that goes untouched, and, and especially in a time period like this, where kids are away from sports and things they love to do. I think it's important to still have that outreach and still connect with them and make sure, hey, how you doing? Like just that text once or twice a week. I think that's all really, really important. So I think the last thing is, any lasting advice. I mean, like you said, we're kind of in this weird limbo time. If you want to give some lasting advice on how to take care of your arm, I think this is something that's important now, because at some point baseball will start up again. And I think it's important that guys are ready. So maybe some lasting pieces of advice on things you can be doing at home to kind of stay ready for when the season does start back up again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way I'll kind of put a bow on it is with kind of a synopsis of what we've talked about. I think that one of the first things we touched on is the mental approach to your arm care. I think this time is brutal right now. We're all at home. We're all bored, whatever it is, but this is also an opportunity to kind of analyze your mindset towards arm care. If you're an athlete, as a coach, what we were just talking about, your mindset towards your players. How progressive are you? How open are you? Stuff like that. And as a player, like John said, the season's going to come, whether it's this year, next year, whenever. And so what are you doing throughout the week? Kind of structure yourself. And this is a great time to be experimental and figure out what works for your arm. And so the number one thing I would say for sure you should be doing, arm circles and bands 3 to 4 times a week. That's just to avoid atrophy in the arm. You don't want the arm getting stiff. You don't want everything you built up for before this time to kind of go away. And so with arm circles and bands, you're going to get blood flow, heat, range of motion, all the healthy buzzwords for your arm care. And then if you're fortunate enough to have a park near your house, or if you have a backyard with chain link fence and can throw without a partner, do that. Have fun with throwing by yourself. Film it. Social media is huge these days. It'd be a great quarantine video of you long tossing by yourself. And if you can't, and you can only get to the bands, like I said, you can simulate a long toss, do more sets of the forward throwing. And then this is a great time to just start with 10 minutes a day, or 10 minutes, let's just say 3 times a week, make it easier, of just laying down and being quiet. If you want to put on like some serene music or something, but just lay down, see what happens with your mind, see if you can focus on the breath. And you'll be shocked at, if you do that consistently for a couple weeks, how you can start to lay the foundation for a really good mindset and a really good mental practice. But my parting words would be, number one, I think it doesn't go without saying, because I'm going to say it, and I hate when people say it goes without saying and then they say what they're going to say. But follow the experts' advice right now. We're in a weird time, unprecedented time, so stay safe, social distance, all that good stuff. And then take this as an opportunity to figure out what works for you. Like we said, as a parent, as a coach, as a player, be experimental. Use this time to kind of analyze your approach and figure out what gets you closer to the best version of yourself as a player, coach, parent, human, whatever it is. That would be my parting words there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think, I think that kind of wraps it up, and I think that sums up kind of everything we talked about and gives guys a good kind of thing to do during this time. And, I really appreciate you coming on. I think we hit upon a lot of really good topics, and hopefully the people that end up listening to this are inspired by kind of the things we touched upon, and are, especially coaches, are ready to kind of make a change. Maybe this will inspire someone who was maybe kind of stuck in, we want to call it that old school mentality. And they're inspired now to make a change and really help their guys take that next step. So, China, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this went really well. I'm really excited, and wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we can stay in touch going forward.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, John, and stay safe, everyone, for sure.
All right, great. Thank you.